It's a gathering of the most influential leaders and changemakers in technology coming together to explore this rapidly evolving industry. Hello, I'm Jon Fortt, and welcome to East Tech West, CNBC's exclusive, invitation-only tech event taking place right here in Bangkok, Thailand. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll be speaking with some of the power players shaping our digital future. First up, AI for everyone. What is it and why does it matter? Let's find out. Kasima, kick us off. You're working on a project that's near and dear to your heart that strikes at the core of what we're talking about here, Typhoon. Why is it important to have large language models, AI, that's in a local language when, arguably the other models may be a little slower, but we'll get to it.
One of the best places to start here is to think about how English-focused these models have been, right? The foundation of the models that we generally all love to use, Anthropic, OpenAI, ChatGPT, they're fundamentally English-based models. But if anyone in here, which I assume plenty of people in this room, speak another language, you can understand that the way you think, potentially, the way you interact with the world, the way you are when you speak another language can be very different, right? And so in our view, we believe it's very important to not just to take English and translate it, or even have those models developed by maybe primarily English speakers, but to take ownership and to be in control of our destiny here in sort of developing this kind of technology for a specific language, for a specific culture, for a specific country.
Let's talk about that open source piece. Prem, you're with Red Hat, which is one of the big winners of the original open source era, right? Recently purchased by, in the past few years, purchased by IBM for a tidy sum, right? One of the biggest software acquisitions ever. But this represents a huge creation of value around something open source that back in the early 2000s was seen as this destroyer of value. Oh my goodness, like we have all these closed systems that have gotten huge and created, and now open source, it's just chaos, right? It's barbarians with spears and keyboards are gonna destroy all that. But that's not what happened. How do you view the use of open source technology and AI, where the transparency creates opportunity, but also where the openness, you don't always know what people are inserting into the code base? How do you view the puts and takes there for this region?
Open source was about bringing a community of people to be able to contribute to creating value, right? That was the first piece of it. The next aspect of it was to bring an ecosystem of technology players to make sure that that value is flexible, it is open, it can be integrated, etc. Now, bringing that back, so we see that cycle in the context of AI as well. And in the last 3 years, there's a lot of talk, and rightfully so, right? It's only in October when ChatGPT came into the fore of 2022 back then. So last 3 years, there's been a lot around LLMs and large language models, etc. And which is an important discussion and will continue to evolve. But what we're seeing in our conversations with customers in the region is that how do I get rubber to hit the road? How do I get that to land, right? How do I scale my AI models and my applications to bring customer value? And of course, there are, AI is resource hungry, compute hungry, memory hungry, energy hungry. It is hungry. And when you look at these emerging markets that we are a part of, right, it's important to be able to address that issue as well. So you spoke about making sure open and security, and we've got that covered over the years. It's become enterprise ready because it is very robust and secure, and we'll get there. But it is this piece of taking AI models from training and learning into inference in production and making that more optimal in terms of consumption, right, from an energy and resource standpoint, which we are passionate about.
Kasima, take this open source concept and bring it home. You worked for GitHub years ago, which has been a big contributor platform for open source innovation. And we're at this moment, it feels to me, where there's the potential for certain talent-rich economies to surge ahead. I think about South Korea post-World War II and what economic planning, industrialization did for that country. And I think maybe there's the potential for that to happen for certain countries with AI coming on, but the planning's got to be right. So you've got this interesting bicultural and deep experience within open source. How does Thailand, how does Southeast Asia tap into that? And this is bouncing off of a question that I see here from the audience, to maintain agency and sovereignty, but also get some velocity.
There's plenty of amazing talent here in Southeast Asia and in Thailand, especially technical talent. And to have that captured in a way that isn't publicly accessible or ecosystem developing feels like a shame, right? Doing open source is the way that we create sort of a collective energy to be able to stand up in a larger world of significantly more resources, significantly more talent capability. By banding together and doing it in an open source way is how we push sovereignty forward for Thailand, and how we leverage that in a way that is beneficial for the entire country, for the society.
I see some questions here popping up on Slido. I like to open it up for questions earlier so I can get a sense of what you're thinking, so feel free to continue to do that. And so, Jeff, I'm going to read to you one of these off of here. It's right along the lines of what we're talking about. What does AI sovereignty look like for small or mid-sized countries? Does it require full stack capabilities, or can modular partnerships ensure independence? AWS kind of has this frenemy relationship with so many of the folks on stage. So there are ingredients and there are full recipes. How do you approach that? How should countries approach that?
Firstly, I'd say we're really here just in Thailand and across Southeast Asia to support all industries, all businesses of all shapes and sizes, from the smallest startup to the largest enterprise. And so, the economic models in terms of how we've built cloud services really enable that. So it's very easy to jump on and pay for what you use, etc. So that really does lower the barrier to entry. And as we see, lots of organizations, we take Botnoy here in Thailand, who are a startup who built a speech to text, text to speech platform essentially that translate into over 20 different languages with over 95% accuracy. That's being used by 70 enterprises across Thailand now. And we believe that in the fullness of time, most organizations are really focused on how they're going to try and transform their customer experience and really change that. And if first and foremost you believe that, then you're probably going to think, well, actually all of those customer experiences are probably going to have generative AI built into them in some way in order to help transform that. And so, our view is that in order to do that, then we want to provide those, those building blocks capabilities that can really help organizations build those quickly at scale, have flexibility of open source and great economics just around that. So yeah, we feel the approach is very modular. We see, the largest enterprises and banks like Krung Shri here in Thailand to smaller startups, jumping in and being able to bring value to customers and solve some of the challenges that they see.
There's this skills mismatch in so many economies where the skills that employers want, the soft skills, interpersonal skills, even job experience, new graduates are coming out without that. Are there ways that AI and the democratization of it benefits and closes that gap, or do we have yet another soft skill in prompt engineering that these new graduates are going to have to learn, not only the language of customer service, the language of business, but also the language of AI prompting?
Being in technology for as long as I've been in technology, we've heard this multiple times, right? The internet was going to change the job market in ways that we couldn't see at the time. And I remember reading something at that time about how, 90% of jobs in the next 10 years we haven't even thought of yet. And that's absolutely going to be true of AI, right? Prompt engineering, ways to work with AI, I think those are going to be essential skills going forward. To address more specifically the idea around skills gap, I think, when you see this as a challenge, there's often an opportunity in there as well. And especially with a technology as powerful as this, you could potentially use AI to augment some of those skills, right? Or to do training on some of these soft skills, right? In fact, in SCB, we're piloting a program where we're using AI as basically training customers, right? To help our customer service agents do better on those calls. And so in that way, if we want to look at soft skills, there actually might be a lot of opportunities to leverage AI to do those soft skills, to do that kind of development.
Essentially, this question gets back to the balance of power issue that we touched on earlier. As regional alliances ASEAN, EU, AU explore joint AI frameworks? How can collaboration happen without dominance by larger digital powers within the bloc?
It's an evolving space. And I think policymakers across all the governments we talk to, they're really focusing on, not only collaboration, but getting the country ready. And I also see a lot of questions about the perception that AI is inaccessible to smaller companies. A lot of the costs associated with adoption of technology in general, right? It's not just the piece of technology that, let's say, Databricks or AWS or Red Hat provides, but it's the access to people that knows how to drive this technology. But I'm very optimistic because I'm seeing new development such as, I don't know whether you have heard of this phrase called vibe coding. I learned about it recently. And it basically means that now you can use natural language to code. And I think this is a big game changer because I can't code to save my life. And that now you can actually just type in what you want the machine to do, and the machine will write the code for you. And it means that the skill set of having to know the syntax and the terminology of a code is not that important, but to instruct, to give the right instruction to the machine to do what it needs to do is super important. But the fact is that now doesn't matter if you are a university student who is thinking about, okay, I want to try going into the data and AI space, or to a developer working for Siam Commercial Bank, that I want to try technology, you have access. So that the barrier of entry is somewhat removed, and I think then the rest is up to us.
On this vibe coding thing, which is very much en vogue, talking about it a lot. It seems I'm still not going to go out there and like build an app just by talking to it, because I view it sort of like you can have electronic drum kits and sounds, but you still have to know how to write music. Right? Even if you don't know how to play the drums, you still got to, Vibe coding, I think, is sort of like that. You still have to understand all the elements of how to build a good app, even if you're not going to code it directly. Am I wrong about that? And then how do we open up the possibilities to as broad a population as possible while understanding everybody can't carry a tune?
Okay, John, I'm never going to say that you're wrong, but I'll encourage all of us to think about a scenario where 30 years ago, right, if somebody said, here's an operating system built by a community of developers, and then 20 years from now, you're going to have banks and top government agencies and a whole bunch of telecommunication companies going to be using this piece of operating system, right, for some of enterprise-wide use cases in a more secure, robust fashion. Somebody would have said, you've got to be kidding me, right? That was 30 years ago. And that's the same opportunity that I see from this point onwards, 30 years hence, in the space of AI. And so one of the big things that is there in the market is, in the context of within Gen AI, it's about code generation. It is allowing and helping programmers to be able to kind of get assistance in terms of coding. So here you have a drummer, back to your analogy. You've got drums, you've got a drummer over here, but the drummer doesn't necessarily have all the skill sets to be able to, he has basic skill sets, so you're not going to have somebody who has no idea of drumming, so he has those basic skill sets. But now you've got a sort of a Gen AI assistant within that product, right? An assistant drummer, if you will, right? Sitting right next to you and say, I'm not getting that beat properly, all right? How could I go about that? And lo and behold, I've got a solution over there that helps me to be able to drum better, program better, whatever that use case might be. So never say never, but I'll never say that you're wrong, all right?
Okay. Kasima, finally, 20 years from now, talk Thailand specifically, how will we know if we've succeeded?
We'll know if we succeeded if the amount of AI that we're buying is less than the amount of AI that we're using inside the country. If the economic value of AI is coming from locally built, locally sourced, locally produced, models, infrastructure, if that's coming more from here than it is from a Google or OpenAI, then I think we've done very, very well. I know that's a tall order, but like Prem was saying, believe the impossible,
Next, I'm joined by a panel of experts to unpack the global tech race powering AI, smartphones, and more. There's been this tendency of the big powers to pull at Southeast Asia one way or the other. And we can talk about it in terms of equipment and technology sold in, but there's this AI presence as well, where it's not just about what's physically installed, but also the influence over people. How do you think that's different?
Southeast Asia is very dependent on both economies, both China and America. And I think it's pretty hard to consider that they will go one way or the other. From a telecoms point of view, we're very much about global standardization has helped mobile technology become standardized around the world, and actually it's been one of the enablers that's put AI in the pockets of 6 billion people around the world. It's very important that we continue to focus on not fragmenting the technology, standardizing, working so that technology transcends geopolitics and ultimately is used for good. Most of hardware in mobile technology is made in China.
Right.
But then a lot of the things that are used in Southeast Asia over mobile technology are from the US. So it's a complex algorithm for governments to negotiate. And I think it's been a bit of a catalyst to pull ASEAN together, to acknowledge that maybe it needs to work together a bit more as a bloc to address this balance.
It seems, George, like an effort to have harmony at an extended family gathering where there are different habits and practices across ASEAN, right? When it comes to artificial intelligence and different religious or cultural, even business practices, how do you come to some sort of base agreement or understanding when there are different regulations, different lines that countries are used to drawing?
It's tough. As you know, EU already got to the world's first AI law, right? The world's first comprehensive AI law. The so-called Brussels effect didn't really happen this time, as you didn't see, any countries, in APAC, in ASEAN, just, follow the EU to copy the AI law. The reasons are complicated. One is the economic reason, the cost for enforcement. How many people, qualify the enforcers, we have, you talk about the law enforcement, the government officials, how much they understand, AI, right, before they can enforce. And there's also economic cost in terms of, the enforcement. So I don't see, ASEAN's going to copy, the EU model. And then back to your question, so how can we have sort of a unified approach? I think Singapore wants to sort of, take the lead, to set some, direction, guidance. But then Indonesia will be also like, wait a minute, I'm a much bigger country. The way how you work in Singapore probably cannot be easily copied to, Indonesia. So I think we are still in a very, confusing period, trying to find the pattern. But not to mention, the whole AI technological development is also in the very early stage. There's a Chinese saying, we try to find the stone and then, go through the river. So I think we are very much in this stage right now.
Julian, tell me more about India's role. I find it fascinating how this mobile-driven digital economic agenda out of India with this huge and growing young population certainly poses a big demographic opportunity on the global stage. But how does Southeast Asia get affected by that? And what are the potential benefits?
So China has just crossed 1 billion 5G users a couple of months ago. India's crossed 200 million. America's probably in that same sort of range. But the difference between China and America and India is, India is very much frugal innovation, low cost. It's a completely different demographics. And so for Southeast Asia is looking for leadership. India provides a strong reference point. I think for Southeast Asia, there's a lot of cultural ties, there's a lot of trade ties. Indonesia's trade with India in the last 2 years is something that's about nearly doubled. The president from Indonesia was in India earlier in the year signing an agreement to work stronger together. And I think we will start to see more as India becomes a real partner in the technology, but also policy and regulation as well.
George, where is competitive advantage in that chessboard? that Southeast Asia is playing on, where you have this big AI and digital flood of possibility, but then you're also real places, sometimes with populations or certainly capital structures for the moment at a bit of a disadvantage.
If you think about AI as a technology, eventually you need to apply the technology to a real product, to service. That's how people can use it, right? Otherwise, you just talk about technology like in the R&D center. So I think from that perspective, Southeast Asia still has, greater potential to bring up, something powered by AI, but it could be like an app or a product that everyone will be like, wow. Not just popular in Southeast Asia, but even like, beyond the region. You are right, this is a big region. The demographic is so young, which means, the potential for talents is always there, right? And then the R&D cost is relatively still cheaper than other places. So I think it's not necessarily everyone just, okay, US got OpenAI, China got DeepSeek, what does Thailand need to do, right? We can think outside the box. You don't need to necessarily have another model, but how to have a more practical app or service that powered by technologies, that can already make a huge difference for the region.
Let's start to take some of these audience questions that are rolling in. Julian, what's the risk for Asian economies if they're forced to choose sides in the US-China tech rivalry? Is digital non-alignment realistic?
I think it's inevitable that Southeast Asia economies are going to be dependent on China and America. I think if you look at who's the number one investor in just about every country, it's one of the, they just take different orders. ASEAN is a very diverse region. You've Singapore, and then you've got Laos, and so you've got opposite ends. You've even got small countries, Brunei and Timor-Leste is going to join. It's important that all of them rise, and so that means access to both. So I would say it's not realistic to exclude them, and I don't think any of them would want that anyway.
So, George, I want you to field first one of these here. It says, to the panel's topic, if one country dominates chips or dominates code or AI, is that chaos? Does that reduce innovation, particularly on the chip side? NVIDIA has had quite a run over the past 2-3 years, but then we had DeepSeek, and the idea out there that through a different approach to software, perhaps the chips themselves aren't needed in the same quality and volume as we assumed.
As you said, NVIDIA is now leading, the AI chip design. But then, I will not really underestimate, Huawei. I think their new, 900C, maybe still 60%, 70%, of the, the capacity of the advanced chips by NVIDIA. But look, in some cases, you don't need 100%, advanced chip, right? You can still do the work very well. And at the end of the day, don't forget that the technology is also a people business. It's all backed by the smart engineers, right? And then you look at the Silicon Valley, there are how many Indian engineers, how many Chinese engineers, and given the US domestic policy, and those people are coming back to their countries. So give it 10 years, or maybe even shorter time, the industry landscape could be changed totally. And then by the time China will say, hey, look, I have a cheaper, more affordable version of NVIDIA, and I will bring it to all my Belt and Road Initiative countries, right? So right. China already got a DeepSeek. What China needs is a hardware version of DeepSeek that can really rival NVIDIA. And then, bingo, it's like hardware, software, one country has everything.
Well, that'll be all for this episode of East Tech West. For more information, head over to our website. I'm Jon Fortt. Thank you for watching.